This story of how I caught this man cheating on me is from a movie. It's hilarious. It seems insane. It doesn't make sense. And I don't know how to even start. I don't even know how to start telling it. Let me tell you, it's because of a hashtag. I caught him cheating because of a hashtag. Hi fam, and welcome to The Truth Hurts with Tony Quinn, where we talk addiction, recovery, and everything in between. Okay, so in today's episode, I am going to discuss recovery and the difference between recovery and sobriety. I have been sober for 12 years, and I can tell you that in those 12 years, there have been plenty of times I haven't necessarily been in recovery. I haven't been working on myself. I've been reverting back to old coping mechanisms. I've acted on manipulation. I've lied. I've made mistakes. I have placed expectations on people I should never have placed on them and then expected them to reach that expectation. I have been in awful relationships, and I knew what I was getting myself into, yet I stuck it out anyway. Sounds like me in active addiction. I have been through this in my recovery, and we're going to discuss mistakes I made in recovery, lessons I learned in recovery, and end off with the gifts of recovery, the gifts of these lessons and the gifts of learning from these mistakes. So there's going to be a few story times in this, so let's just dive in. I feel this is a topic a lot of people don't necessarily talk about. You see people with recovery and long-term recovery, and you automatically could assume that their lives are so much better, infinitely better, making better decisions every single day. And trust me, there's many times I have looked at myself in the mirror and been like, you're not doing too hot. You're not doing too well. Why are you doing this? And I do it anyway. So let's unpack that, and let's get honest, and let's get real, and let's show the difficult parts of recovery, because recovery is difficult. Life is difficult. Learning who you are in recovery is difficult. Okay, so now let's actually dive right in. And I hate when I say that. I'm sorry. I just don't know how to get to it. I'm learning. I don't even know where to start because I've made that many mistakes. Let's start at the beginning. When I first got sober and when I first left rehab. When I left rehab, I went home, had a massive fight with my mom, and made a good decision. One I was privileged enough to be able to make. And I requested that I go to a halfway house. And I booked into a halfway house, and I stayed there for a really long time. It was like a year in the halfway house. And when I was in that halfway house, I did start doing really well in my addiction recovery. My eating disorder definitely crept up and it got really, really bad. But I'm not going to say that that was a part of mistakes in my addiction recovery. That was my mental health, and that was my primary illness showing up when my one coping mechanism was taken away, which was substances, which was drugs and alcohol. So I'm not going to focus in on that, and I'm not going to be too hard on myself for that in this episode and unpack that in this episode, because I think it's something completely different to acting on behaviors associated with my addiction. My eating disorder and my OCD behaviors are not there because of addiction. They're there pre-addiction, and they're something I had to deal with in addiction recovery, not in sobriety, in addiction recovery. So I'm going to kind of put that to the side for now and just discuss the generic kind of mistakes I made when I was in addiction recovery or sobriety. So I first got sober. One of the biggest rules when you are in a rehab facility or move to a halfway house is usually do not get into a relationship within the first year, especially with someone who is also in recovery. Not only are you putting yourself in danger, you're putting them in danger too. And I don't necessarily agree with that fully. I think I've seen plenty of relationships work within a recovery space. So I'm not going to be here and kind of steamroll all over that and say I wholeheartedly believe in that. I've seen plenty of relationships work out, and I've seen people flourish in those relationships. But I was actively seeking some sort of romantic connection when I was in this halfway house. I was seeking someone to make me feel whole. And that is a part of my addiction, trying to fill that hole in my soul. I hate that saying, but that's the only way to describe it. With a relationship, with something to distract me from the eating disorder I was struggling with something to distract me from going back to my old behaviors. So I was actively kind of looking around and seeking relationship and seeking it in an environment I believed was safe or safer than what I had been through. And I met a guy about a year into my recovery who had just left a rehab facility, and he moved into the sober house, and there was an instant connection. And I then moved a year in from the halfway house to a sober living facility, which I stayed in for another year. Now, this person was in the halfway house at the time. This person was newer in recovery than I was earlier, not newer, earlier in their recovery than I was. And I actively sought this out. I sought this relationship out, and I could easily romanticize it to recovering addicts, to different substances we were addicted to. We could make this work. This could be like a fairy tale kind of romance, you know, when in actual fact, the only thing we really had in common was addiction and recovery. But at the time, I thought it was something positive I could go through without thinking of the consequences, not the consequences for me, the consequences for this person, the consequences for him did not cross my mind. I acted on impulse. I got into a secret relationship with this person, and automatically the saying is our secrets keep us sick. And I was very good at keeping secrets, especially in my addiction. I loved keeping secrets. They were my little things, you know. And so I got into a secret relationship with this person. We'd meet up, we'd go to a park together, we would spend time together, and it was all very secret. But, you know, you're in an environment with other recovering addicts and you can't bullshit, and eventually it got called out. And one day I was at the sober house and I got a phone call from him, and he said he had been kicked out of the halfway house. And immediately my heart sunk, and I was like, I have put this person in danger. I've 100% put this person in danger who is new in their recovery, addicted to a really hard substance that could kill them at any moment. And I have put them in a situation where they're in complete danger. That shocked me to my core. So I tried to step up, and this person stayed. I moved from the sober house to my mom's house for the week that this person had been kicked out, and he stayed at the house with us. And then he was able to eventually move into the sober house, and we moved in together immediately. He went from the halfway house to the sober house and moved in with me. And that was the beginning of a 2-year relationship. That was actually, I was very lucky to have been in a relationship that was super healthy and very kind, very rooted in recovery. Like I said, that's the one thing we had in common. It was very rooted in recovery, going to NA meetings, doing the steps, seeing our sponsors, hanging out with people in recovery at that time, because we were both rebuilding our lives at the same time, making new friends at the same time. And that's what happened for a very long time. However, you know, they say when you were in a toxic relationship and the person you're with is the toxic one, and then when you start to work on yourself, you kind of notice you might be the toxic one in your new healthy relationship. That absolutely happened. I was incredibly toxic in the situation because I had no real emotional regulation, and I was struggling with my eating disorder. Basically, my eating disorder took precedent in the relationship. It was my number one priority. We were going to NA meetings. I was seeing my sponsor, but I wasn't being honest about what was actually going on and my struggle with my mental health, although it became quite obvious at a point. And eventually it culminated into my partner saying to me, I need to get help. Like, I need to get help. And I decided 2 years into our relationship that I was going to put myself in an institution for my eating disorder. And now, if I am being brutally honest, the only reason I did this was to get people off my back about the eating disorder, was to get him off my back about the eating disorder. And when I was in the eating disorder unit at this institution, and I was there for a while, I was lying. I was manipulating. I was telling falsehoods. I was getting away with things. I knew the institution very well. I knew where to hide things, and I knew how to act on bad behavior. So when I left, I think I left sicker than when I came in. And it was very hard for him to see. It was very hard for someone who's dealing with their own recovery to see me struggling and not being able to do anything about it. And I could hide behind the fact that I was still sober, that I was going to NA meetings, that I was seeing my sponsor. And that became a very hard situation for this person to live with. On top of that, eating disorder, mental health aside, I also didn't know who I was in my addiction. I also didn't know who I was in my addiction recovery, because for so many years, I was wearing masks. I was fitting in with the people around me to get what I wanted, to manipulate. And that's exactly what I did in the relationship too. Whatever music he liked, I liked. Whatever activities he was into, I was into. I just took on his personality and made it mine. I wanted to be perfect for him, and I wanted to be indispensable for him, which is pure manipulation and also just incredibly low self-esteem, unwilling to learn who I really was. But I wasn't really doing that much of internal work because I was placing all my work on another human being. And that's not a good place to put someone in. It was actually quite abusive, the way I placed my recovery and expectation on this person to kind of save me. It's not a safe situation for anyone to be in. And eventually he left. He told me he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't watch me self-destruct. He couldn't see what was happening, and he couldn't condone what was happening. And my immediate response to the being left, to being in my head abandoned, even though it was for the right reasons and for his own safety, his own mental health at this point, I said to him, I'm going to relapse. I'm going to relapse. That is abusive. It's the same as turning around to someone and saying, I'm going to unalive myself because you're going to leave me. That is holding someone hostage. And this person had been through the ringer in their experience with addiction and recovery. They knew exactly what I was doing, and they called my bluff, and they weren't going to stay around for that. So they left. And I remember that night that he left me, I messaged my ex-boyfriend from Active Addiction and asked what he was doing. And as soon as I sent that message, I realized what I had done. I realized I had opened the door and was about to throw, at that point, I think it was 2.5 years of my recovery away to prove a point. And I noticed these behaviors, immediately blocked him and phoned my sponsor and told them what was going on, and reached out to my family and threw myself into the Narcotics Anonymous community. Now, I always preface this by saying Narcotics Anonymous is what works for me. There are plenty other ways to ask for help, to reach out for help. There's plenty other support groups available. When I speak, I only share on my experience, and that's what worked for me. So I threw myself into Narcotics Anonymous. I had gotten a new job at this point, and I was ready to kind of throw myself into that as well. But what I did was throw myself way too much into the work aspect. And I started showing up at work 5 o'clock in the morning, setting this precedent for myself, doing all the work, making my entire personality this job I was in. And it was a really bad environment for me to be in. And it was a high pressure job. And I just made that my whole identity for 9 months. And I started to completely break down. It was work, NA meeting, work, NA meeting. That is all I had. And my life started slowly, and my eating disorder, my life started to slowly slip from under me. And I eventually left that company and found a new job. And that's when I decided I had to start actually rebuilding, like really rebuilding, learning who I am, finding friends, not just in a recovery space, in the outside world. And that's exactly what I did. Okay, here's what happened. I was in a relationship for the first 2.5, 3 years of my addiction recovery. I had based my entire personality on this relationship. I molded myself to fit who I thought he wanted me to be. Without him saying that, I created this expectation on myself and what I should be for this person, which was something I did pre-addiction and during addiction. It is a part of one of my biggest character defects, not allowing myself to get to know myself, manipulating myself and wearing mask after mask, manipulating other people by wearing masks to fit in. That is all I had known. I never addressed that in the first 2.5, 3 years of my recovery. I was part of a job that I had thrown myself into, and I was scared to make mistakes, and I almost cross-addicted to work and to trying to build a career in that kind of high-pressure space. And I had not necessarily made strong connections with people outside of my partner, outside of the person I was dating for the first 3 years. I had friends in the recovery space, but I never allowed them to see the full me because I didn't know who the full me was. And that's when things really started to change for me, and I started to find myself really living recovery. Because when you see all of that kind of fall apart in front of you, it's either go back to addiction for me or try to really make a significant change and get to know myself. And I chose to get to know myself. What I did was I moved into a sober living facility, another one. I stayed in a really small room. It's all I could afford. And I stayed there and I started going to NA meetings. I got a new job. I found myself in a job that I was privileged enough to find a job where I was able to do things I love, like writing and creating content for the company I worked with. They knew everything. They knew about my past addiction. They knew about the eating disorder, and it was a really safe environment for me to be in. And I also decided at that point that it was time for me to also venture out. I had spent all those years kind of locked in the recovery environment without actually living recovery. And it was great for a while. It was a really safe space for me. And I'm not saying that the first 3 years, nothing changed and I was still this person struggling. No, in those 3 years, I started making amends with my family. I started getting closer and closer with my brother, who really did not trust me. And I started building that relationship. Me and my father became inseparable. I would see him every single Sunday for breakfast during those years. And he allowed me space to rebuild our relationship and, get to know each other. And I also had to work on my relationship with my mom and the difficulties within our relationship during those 3 years. And sobriety gave me the opportunity to do that. It gave me the opportunity to open up a bit, take criticism, also discuss things that made me uncomfortable, set boundaries for myself with people. It absolutely did that. But there was still something missing. And it was because I was keeping a lot of secrets. My eating disorder was the biggest secret I was keeping, although it was very obvious to a lot of people. It was still my little secret, the next best thing. And it stopped me from becoming close with people and creating these like kind of long-term meaningful human connections. Now that I was in a sober house and getting called out on this kind of behavior, I was going to NA meetings and actually started listening, really listening in meetings, not speaking, listening. I started to realize I wanted to really rebuild, and I really wanted to get to know who I was without another person there, without a relationship. I wanted to know who I was. So I decided to focus in on nurturing friendships. And I started to meet people at my job, and I started to connect with people at my job and decided I had met a few people I really liked and wanted to nurture those relationships. And I did. I also realized I needed to go out and explore, and my friends owned a bar I'd never been to. And so it was new ground for me being sober at this place. I'd never used at this place before. So I went there, I met a friend who owned it, and I left after 30 minutes, 20 minutes, because I was incredibly uncomfortable. I got in my car and I went home, and that was good. It showed me I was able to do it, but I was also able to set boundaries and know when I was uncomfortable. As soon as I started creating these friendships, I was able to go with these people to that pub, to that bar, to that restaurant, and sit in a safe environment with people who I really got to know, and in getting to know them, really got to know myself. So I got to know people outside of a recovery space, but at the same time, I was invested in Narcotics Anonymous and getting to really know people in a recovery space. And those are the people that allowed me to really get to know myself. By listening to those stories, by sharing my story in that space, I could slowly uncover who I was. I started really doing work with my sponsor, going through the steps, sharing things about myself, discussing my eating disorder, kind of opening up about that with the friends outside of recovery. And I was doing so much internal work. I moved out of the sober house and into my own place for the first time by myself. And I had these amazing friendships, both within recovery and people outside of a recovery space. I had reconnected with my father, my brother, my mother, my family. I was building a career for myself that I really enjoyed and really liked. I was safe. I was thriving. I was doing well. And I thought I was ready for a relationship at that point. I thought I was ready for a relationship. And I met a guy and I started seeing him. This was someone I had known previously, and it felt safe because I'd known him. I'm not a person who goes on a dating app and meets up with someone. Like, I have to know them. Like, I have to know I'm safe. And I met up with this person. We started seeing each other. And when we started seeing each other, I started disassociating from the Narcotics Anonymous recovery space. I stopped speaking to my sponsor. I stopped going to meetings completely. And I threw myself into this kind of relationship that I was building. I still had my friends and I could speak to them about everything that was going on. And they were a huge part of my life. But I started seeing this person and once again reverted back to old behaviors where I made this person my entire identity. What happened was I found out that this person was seeing someone else while seeing me. So I left. A few months later, I was like, maybe I should reach out to this person again. And I did. And I thought I could save him. I could be the person that changes his outlook on relationships. I'll stop him from cheating. He'll fall hopelessly in love with me, and I'll do whatever it takes to do that. Changed once again my entire personality, my taste in music, everything about me to suit the ideal that this person wants. I even tried to dye my hair like bright pink to suit this person's kind of aesthetic, and my hair fell out. And it was blonde for a while, long story. But that is how much I would throw myself into trying to fit a mold for another person. So obviously my recovery fell by the wayside. I was going to work thinking about this person. My entire life became this person. And it's really sad to think about that because I was still lacking the self-esteem. And what happened was the eating disorder resurfaced worse than it had been in a long time, worse than it had ever been. And I got really, really ill because the relationship became super weird. It was one of those relationships where he would not want to be out with me in public. He would only ever come to my house when he wanted to see me and leave when he wanted to leave. There was no like kind of posts on social media about us. It felt secretive, like I was a secret. And I could see all of this. My friends that I created in that time pointed this out to me and said to me, this is what is happening. You know, this person is keeping you a secret. They're keeping you a secret. They don't want people to know about you. And I watched that happen and I started falling deeper and deeper into the eating disorder. And then my father got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I was told my father was going to die. And I share the story. I was in the room and my father got told he had 9 months left to live. And I looked at him and I watched him take on this news knowing he was going to die. He knew he was going to die. And I watched him absorb that. And there was this sense of helplessness I cannot explain. And I watched it happen. And he came up to me after getting his diagnosis, pulled me aside and said to me, please don't die before me. And he was referring to my eating disorder. And he was referring to the things I was letting go by the wayside in my recovery. He wasn't even worried about me relapsing on substance. He did mention it. He was more worried about my literal life because of my eating disorder. While he knew he was going to die, he made me promise him that I would fight for my recovery while he fought for his, knowing that his recovery wasn't possible and mine was. And I made a decision to work on the eating disorder at that point, like really buckle down and work on the eating disorder. I was still in this relationship during this time, but most of my time was spent with my brother and my father, taking my father to the hospital, helping him with medications, with chemo. That became my life. So this partner was there as a nice kind of distraction from what was going on. So I could simply ignore the red flags because I was dealing with a major crisis and really also trying to work on my eating disorder at the same time. And my father passed away. My father had his funeral, went to the funeral. He never lived to see me recover from my eating disorder, but I was doing pretty well. And then the guy I was seeing, 2 seconds. There were so many red flags that I ignored in this relationship. Let me give you just one example, barring the fact that he had previously cheated. I found out, thought I could fix him. At my dad's funeral, this guy came up to me and my brother and said, I'm just tired. I think I'm going to leave. And my brother looked him in the eye and said, you're tired. You're going to leave. We had been up with my father's body that literal day and buried him that day. And this guy told me he was tired. It was like who he was, and I was totally fine with it. I could just see my brother's disappointment, like, what is going on here? But I didn't want to see the red flags. Then this guy told me that he had an opportunity overseas in America, and he would be away for a while just for work. And he reassured me. I asked him a lot of questions, are you going to do this? Are we going to be together when you're there? What is the plan? He reassured me. He even told me he would go public with our relationship on social media, Facebook, put the in a relationship with thing. And we did that, and I felt some sort of relief with that. And then I remember doing that and then checking that no one's seeing the relationship status. No one's like commenting it, nothing. And I'm like, that's just a bit odd. And I asked my friends if they could see it. And what he had done is he hid it. He hid it from his profile. And it just said on my profile, Tony Becker is in a relationship. It didn't say with who. So another red flag. He spoke me out of it, made me think it was a mistake his side or whatever. And I went with it. I was dealing with grief, and I wasn't really willing to see what was really going on around me, because that would mean I would have to see what I kind of had accepted for a while and how much I was ignoring. And it would also be a bit of an ego thing. Like, I couldn't fix him. I couldn't change him. I know that's not what it was. And I know it's way deeper than that, but that is explaining why I ignored these things. I didn't want to see these things. He told me he was going to go to America, and he did. He went to America soon after my dad passed and reassured me, kept in contact or whatever. Now, here's the best thing I ever did. You know how I manipulate my personality to kind of suit other people? Me changing my personality to suit what I thought he wanted of me is what got him caught. This story of how I caught this man cheating on me is from a movie. It's hilarious. It seems insane. It doesn't make sense. And I don't know how to even start. I don't even know how to start telling it. Let me tell you, it's because of a hashtag. I caught him cheating because of a hashtag. So here's the story. I followed a niche hashtag on Instagram called Psychobilly Music. I changed my personality and my music style to suit what this guy liked. I got into Psychobilly Music. I started following a hashtag Psychobilly Music. Not a lot of people use that hashtag, okay? One day I'm sitting at home and a video pops up on my feed. Someone had posted a video at a concert with one of my favorite bands, favorite bands back then that I just pretended to like, but I actually do kind of like psychobilly music. I do need to say that I like psychobilly music, so thanks to that guy for that. But anyway, a video someone was filming popped up with the hashtag psychobilly music, and it was at a concert of one of the bands that I liked. This man, complete stranger on the internet, was filming the concert, and the camera was directly behind my then boyfriend. Now, you're going to say, how do you know that that was your boyfriend? Mans has very obvious tattoos on the back of his head and was wearing a branded jacket. Branded. It was his jacket, his name, his tattoos. So regardless, it was him. That is how bad he was at hiding this kind of stuff. Anyway, I digress. He was standing there and he was making out with a woman. He was making out with her, and this guy just happened to be filming the concert, but standing directly behind him. And I saw it. And my reaction was to tag all of his friends and tag all of my friends. And the poor guy whose Instagram that was, I apologize to this day, because you just probably woke up to absolute chaos. But that is what happened. And I messaged him. And now the time difference is quite significant, but I messaged him and I said, who is the woman with the pink hair? And he was like, what are you talking about? And I sent him the video. He saw he had been tagged in the video and still denied it was him. How do you deny that's you? How do you deny that the person with your face, with your tattoos and with your jacket is you? Just wouldn't want to accept it. And he was at that concert. So I speak about that, but it felt like relief in that moment. I wasn't necessarily heartbroken or devastated. It was like relief. It was like, okay, I can finally let this go. And I also couldn't ignore when that happened that he isn't this horrific, awful person in the situation. It reminds me of when I was in active addiction, when I started dating a guy who I knew was a drug addict, and I was like, I'm going to go for that. I continued seeing this guy after he first cheated on me, thinking I could change him. He put all these signs in front of me, all these red flags in front of me that I just didn't want to see. But he did find me at a very vulnerable time in my life. When your father is dying, it's a very vulnerable time. When your father dies, it's a very vulnerable time. So I was distracted with grief and was ignoring what was happening right in front of me. I left. And that's when another real experience of recovery hit me. I was like, I'm going to do well. I started going back to NA meetings, started investing even more time with my friendships and really, really just nurturing relationships with my friendships. And I started going out more and started socializing more with all my boundaries in place. I'm going to leave when I need to leave. I'm uncomfortable. But then things started to slip again. This is a pattern. Things started to slip again. I was going out a lot. I was socializing a lot. And I found myself with a group of people who were actively using, not my drug of choice, but they were using substances. These people, shout out to them, they respected me, they respected my recovery, they knew what I was going through, they never mentioned drugs in front of me, they never took drugs out in front of me. I just knew what was happening. I was very aware of what was happening around me. And I was comfortable in that situation because no one put me in an awkward situation, and I always knew I could leave. So I never blamed these people for it, ever. It's not their issue. I am not their issue. I wanted to be there. And one night, it all changed when I went out, and someone who I considered a really good friend of mine pulled out a bag of drugs in front of me and offered them to me. And I couldn't, things just shattered around me, and I was like, I need to actually get back to recovery again. I keep doing really well and thriving, and then putting myself in situations that are quite chaotic, quite dangerous. And what? Why? For what? For what? What is my reason to keep going back to putting myself in dangerous situations? I am not blaming these people. I put myself in a situation that made me vulnerable as well. No one should take out your drug of choice in front of you, especially if they know what you've been through. So yes, there's that too. But I kept going back to these old behaviors, to these really toxic places that were kind of leaving a door open to relapse. So when that happened, I also decided it's time to make a greater change and stop going out as much as I was going out, start going back to NA meetings. My eating disorder was getting much better, much better. I was nurturing the relationships with friends that really cared about me, that I really cared about. It was like really getting to know myself again. I started figuring out what kind of music I liked. I started figuring out the things I was into. I started growing and learning, and that's when I met my now boyfriend of 6 years, longest relationship I've ever been in, healthiest relationship I've ever been in. My eating disorder was doing well. My self-esteem was up. I was going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings. I was throwing myself back in the program. I was working on my bad behaviors. I was learning from other people, learning from myself, really thriving, moved to another job, started building new careers, got 2 amazing cats in this time, and started building like a family. He moved in with me. It was magnificent time. And the reason I think all of this worked out when it did was because I had started working on my mental health a lot, getting honest and open about it. Even when I was struggling, being honest and open about it. I was going back to my comfort places, to Narcotics Anonymous meetings. To this day, 6 years into my relationship now, I go to an NA meeting once a week. I've got a home group. I've got a sponsor. I've got sponsees. I do the work. I love giving back. I do service. I go to hospitals, institutions, and prisons. I do these kind of things to try and carry the message, because I know what happens with me when I kind of let certain things that help in my healing go. And I've found what works for me. And it's been incredible. It's been beautiful. I have also not, I'm so proud to say this, I have not changed my personality to fit the relationship I am in now. And I think it's because I got a sense of self-esteem back before I met my current partner. I think I had learned who I was. I had learned what friendship was. I had slowly started to uncover pieces of my real personality, not other people's personalities. And we do not like all of the same things. We do not like all of the same music, but we can share, we can talk, and we can learn from each other. And that's where real thriving started taking place for me. That's when real change started happening for me. That's when the eating disordered thoughts started lifting for me. I was doing so much work on myself. And of course, it hasn't been easy. I've got a video on this channel about the fact that this time last year I was in psychosis because I was acting on bad behavior while in this really good point in my life. I put down the substances, I put down the drugs, the eating disorder got better, and I thought that was my primary issue. Nope, my primary issue is obsessive compulsive disorder. I have OCD and it started manifesting last year, and I fell into a deep psychosis. Even within that psychosis, when I got diagnosed and was told I was in psychosis and I could start to understand what was going on, I had built up tools in these years that I could use. I could reach out to my sponsor and tell them what was happening. I could reach out to my friends in recovery, friends outside of recovery, tell them what was happening. I could tell my partner what was happening. He could learn, he could understand what was happening. And we had built such a strong connection that in that time, he stood by me when a lot of other people would have left. A lot of other people would have left because he knew who I was fundamentally as a human being. And when I was in psychosis, I was kind of aware of what was happening and I really wanted help. I really wanted out of it. So I sought that help. I took the antipsychotics. I tried everything. And it was a long journey, and eventually came out the other side. And I feel no shame around the fact that I have struggled with my mental health while in my addiction recovery, while in my sobriety. Because it's not why the addiction, it's why the pain, it's what's underneath. I have mental illnesses and mental health issues that I need to work on every day. It's just easier to work on them without substance. It's easier to work on them when I have gained tools in my recovery that I can use for every aspect of my life. Reaching out for help, saying I need help, reaching out to people I trust, offering help to other people. All of that I have learned in my recovery and in my sobriety. And I can look back and see where my behavior starts to slip. I can look back and see where people use the word character defects. I personally like that word. A lot of people don't, but I can see when my character defects come out, when I am trying to manipulate a situation to suit my needs and immediately call myself out on it. I can see when that's happening because no part of me wants to go back to who I was when I was inactive, and I can very quickly slip back to the person I was inactive even while sober. And I feel like that's important to acknowledge and to recognize. It's not an easy journey. It's a difficult journey. It's a tough journey. It's tough because life is tough. It's hard because life is hard. And there are things that exist within me without substance that I still have to face, that I still have to deal with, that I still have to look at and unpack and work on every single day. But in telling that story, there are gifts. There are gifts in all those struggles. The greatest gift of my recovery was the fact that I was able to be there with my father while he was going through the most painful and hardest part of his entire life. I was there from his diagnosis to his death. We had built a relationship over my recovery and nurtured one that when he was sick, I could be there for him. I could be present for him. I could be there with my brother and him. I could deal through all the awful shit that happens when someone in your family is sick because it can become dramatic. There can be drama within family dynamics. Awful shit happens. But I was able to cope through that and be there for my father when he needed people and needed me the most. I would never have done that without sobriety. I would never have done that without recovery. So even looking back on all the bad things I did, on lying, manipulation, making bad decisions, not necessarily bad things I did, just bad decisions, okay? The struggles I went through in my recovery, looking back on all of that, I got through all of that because I was sober. And I was able to look at the tools I had learned in my recovery and lean on them when I needed them most. And recovery and sobriety isn't this beautiful thing that happens and unfolds really quickly. People say the gifts come quickly. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the gifts do not come quickly, and we have to work for them in recovery. We have to work for them, and they come slowly. And some of the gifts we don't even see until it's much later down the line. I did not realize how I was rebuilding a relationship with my family in early recovery, how they were learning to trust me again. I was like, where's my gift of financial reward, or where are my rewards in love and life? No, the gifts were unfolding in front of me quietly and slowly. Quietly and slowly. That day when my first boyfriend in my recovery broke up with me and I wanted to relapse, that was the first day I realized that I had too much to lose if I did go back, and I had to fight for it, even making mistakes along the way. Just like addiction is progressive, so is recovery, and we need to remember that. We need to remember that. I have zero resentment to the people that were involved in my bad decisions in my recovery, because I know why I made those decisions, and I'm able to work through that. You know, I'm able to see what it was for what it was, learn from it, and grow from it. And that's what recovery is. It's learning and growing every single day with mistakes along the way. We are not perfect. We are not perfect. I am not a perfect person. I have made big mistakes in active and in recovery. And it's just about learning and growing with it and being honest and getting honest about it, because secrets, they kept me sick for too long. I hope this helped in some way and unpacked some things. I just also want to share some of my story with you. It's not necessarily a topic, it's just what's happened to me over these 12 years of my recovery. And please feel free to ask more questions. Let's unpack a lot more. And I hope this makes you feel okay on your journey. And I really want to leave you remembering recovery, like addiction, is progressive. It's one day at a time. And we do recover.